Hey guys, welcome to our third episode of the Kings and Queen City podcast. Thanks so much for spending time with us. Today, Taylor has told us we're going to talk about what?
Cash flow.
Cash flow. Cash rules everything around me. Dollar bills.
Cash doesn't actually rule everything around you. Cash flow rules everything around you.
Cash flow rules everything around me.
For most people, it's negative cash flow that actually rules everything around them. And that's in the aspect of bills they pay.
Great point, Taylor. One of the things about Taylor My Business, the way that we make decisions is we ask ourselves a question, and is that, are we going to introduce more cash or cash flow into our business by taking these specific sets of actions? And that's how we kind of prioritize things in our business. But for sure, the top of those metrics is cash flow. Taylor, it's an interesting point you make about how a lot of people's lives are dictated by the fact that they have negative cash flow situations in their life. So they have excessive mortgage payments, or they have excessive car payments, or they have excessive, whatever other things they're doing, a boat payment, a jet ski, an ATV, whatever that happens to be.
I think the more dangerous part is the smaller negative cash flow opportunities. Like, most people aren't adding up how much they spend on their subscriptions, like YouTube and Netflix and Hulu and HBO Go and all these subscriptions. That $12 a month times 14 different subscriptions, that stuff adds up real quick. And then we have the self-imposed subscriptions, right? I need to get Starbucks 3 times a week. I have to go to my hibachi spot every Tuesday. Like, how many of these?
Now, in fairness, Taylor, you do go to your hibachi spot every Tuesday. In fairness.
And I do have that self-imposed subscription going on. If it's Tuesday and you need to find me, guys, I'm at the hibachi spot. But they got that $6.99 lunch special.
Which, by the way, we should really talk about that on a different episode of how your hibachi spot is really a great example of a process. They have it down to a science.
We're not going to talk about process on this call, at least not in that aspect. I love how I always get to sell the sizzle for the next future episode. That will absolutely be a future episode we talk about.
Absolutely.
Hey, Ed, why don't we come back around? How are we talking about cash flow in our business? And when you use that word, what do you specifically mean? So we can make sure everyone's on the same page of what we're talking about.
Perfect. Yeah. So in the context of our rental business specifically, what we're really saying is we want the income generated from the assets after expenses. And so we're going to back out maintenance, management, vacancy, utilities, taxes, insurance, all of that. Once we've backed that out, we get to what's called NOI.
Ed, NOI, what is that?
That's net operating income. Thanks for pointing that out, Taylor. A lot of people stop their analysis there, which is, by the way, the figure that's used for the quote unquote cap rate calculation. One of the problematic problems with that metric is that NOI actually isn't the actual cash that you're receiving each month that you're putting in your pocket. NOI does not take into account debt service. And so what we suggest is to use the metric of cash on cash, which would be going from NOI, backing out debt service, and then you're left with a certain amount of cash. And then the question of cash on cash return is, how much did it cost me to buy a stream of income that was generating that amount of money each month?
Ed, you've got a great point. Because you could purchase a cash flow. If I came in all cash and paid off without getting a mortgage, I could absolutely buy a cash stream that made money. But that's not really what we're looking at. We're looking at, is it better for me to buy the gumball machine for $500 that produces $50 a month? Or is it better for me to buy the house for $500,000 that produces $700 a month? Which one of those is a better income? And the way we do that is with that cash on cash return, shortened to cash flow.
So when we use the term cash on cash return, that's the measurement of the amount of cash flow that we expect the asset to generate and the cost of that cash flow.
We hear lots of people talk about cap rate. The problem there is exactly as you said. They're not considering the debt service. So unless you're going out and buying that property all cash or that multifamily all cash, you're actually not getting that 12 cap that you're talking about or that 15 cap that you're talking about. Because after debt service, there are some examples where you can actually lose money on a property that has a great cap rate. And there's some examples where you can have a great return with a low cap rate. When we take that one additional step and point out this is the actual return that you're going to expect on this specific asset, we can't say property, but really in our world, we're talking about other assets as well, such as businesses and other types of income streams. So when we're talking about an asset and what it produces, we're going to look at the amount of money it produces every month and the amount of money that it took to achieve that And if it's high enough, it's something we're going to chase.
Yep. And when we're talking about cash flow, one of the other things that we use to make determinations in our business is having a specified cash flow that we look at based on the type of asset. And so in a lot of businesses, they talk about this, how much cash do they want per door or one of these other measurements. Well, I don't want to get into exactly how that fits into our buying criteria today. We'll definitely do that on a future podcast. What I do want to point out is that it also allows us to understand one other dynamic of our business, which is how much debt can the asset afford? And so if you're at a situation where you have net operating income and you know what you want to receive in a monthly cash flow, you know actually how much debt you can afford. Let me give you a for instance. If you had a business that was generating $3,000 a month and you thought to operate that business, you needed to be rewarded, say $2,000 a month, then you know the amount of debt that your business can afford is $1,000 a month. Therefore, if you needed $200,000 for that business, you need to find a funding relationship that will allow you to use $200,000 at a rate of $1,000 a month. It's not as much about what interest rate are you charging or what terms are you looking for. It's really about an explicit number. I'm looking to borrow $200,000 at $1,000 a month. What relationship would make that agreement interesting for you?
It's interesting when you approach it from that metric, you flip the script on the normal conversation that's going to be had, as opposed to being a transactional relationship, which we are explicitly against. You become relationship based. I understand that you want X amount return. This is what we're offering on this specific deal. If this isn't the right deal for you, we absolutely have another deal available. This exact conversation with some different numbers actually happened on the way home today with one of our private lenders. We were talking about 3 or 4 different opportunities. 2 of them didn't have the right structure for what he was looking for. And the third opportunity was structured properly for the type of involvement that private lender wanted to participate in. I look forward to sharing with the audience in the future how that deal plays out. Obviously, as we're pushing through this, I can't share specifics today, but anyone listening in the future, jump forward a couple podcast episodes and I'm positive I will talk about this specific deal and how it plays out. Ed, I'd like to circle back around to your conversation on how much debt can the asset afford. I know in the past we've done a specific deal where the owner had a mortgage in place and we actually couldn't pay that mortgage as part of the debt service. Do you want to talk about how this exact metric applied and how we stepped through the situation to make that a win-win for everybody?
That's a deal that we're definitely excited about, and one that now that we've completely exited, we've gone full cycle of sourcing, maintaining, and then exiting that specific property. When we went to enter that relationship with that seller, he specifically had a mortgage in place that was approximately $1,300. After running the numbers, we found that we were able to make a debt payment to him of only $1,100. This discrepancy initially prevented us from doing a deal. After some time, he came back to us and the seller had a little bit more urgency. Spending more time with him, we discussed some options and we ended up settling on a lease option where we would lease the property from him for $1,150 a month, and he would be responsible to continue making the mortgage payments on the property at the $1,300. In this specific case, we then rented the property for $1,550 or a profit before expenses of $400 a month. What was neat about this deal is because it was a lease option, it was very minimal cost to enter into. In this specific case, because we had entered the property as a lease option, our initial costs were very low. In fact, I think we paid about $2,700 in initial deposits and legal expenses to take controlling interest in the property. Once we placed a tenant in the property, we received approximately $3,300 in deposits, first and last month's rent. In this case, we were cashed out of the property from about 2 weeks into the project. From that point forward, we received something on the scale of $200 to $300 a month, again, after expenses. Once we were able to sell the project, we then exited with a profit of over $20,000. So Taylor, this is a great example of where we were able to enter a property, control it for some period of time, generating cash flow, and then we were able to exit the property at a profit. It's really one of these situations that solved a problem for a seller, provided clean, safe, affordable housing for a tenant and allowed us to make a profit while providing those services.
Great feedback, Ed. And really the important part here is you actually never own that property. Is that accurate?
Yeah, definitely. When you're doing the lease options, you generally never actually become the owner of the property. A lot of times we describe that relationship to the property as the controlling interest.
This is why lease option is one of mine and Ed's favorite strategies to take down property. You guys will hear us talk a lot about it and about how that interacts with our business. Lease option plays an integral role in what we do.
You know, Taylor, another good example of these same cash flow strategies are the large property that you have a little north of Charlotte. Should we talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, that was a really great opportunity. You know, we had a seller that was absentee owner, which means that they don't live in the property. They lived somewhere else. In this case, they lived down south and had no intention of ever coming back to Charlotte. They were behind on taxes because it's a larger house. So taxes are very expensive.
Well, Taylor, relatively, right? When those of us in North Carolina talk about expensive taxes, I think we're talking about a year what some people may pay in a month.
Fair point, Ed. It's all relative, right? In this case, it did have some higher taxes than they were comfortable paying, especially when they were absentee owners. We had caught it off the tax foreclosure list, and after coming to agreement with them, we're able to pay those back taxes, do some moderate repairs to the house, and then rent it out for a profit. This property specifically has an incredible cash flow situation because of the way this specific deal is structured. We are very excited to keep this as one of our, we call it a legacy piece, as it will be in our portfolio for a very long time to come. Continuing again to provide a clean, safe, and affordable place for our tenants to live, providing a great return for our partners on this deal, and giving us more cash flow, which, back to Ed's point, will this increase my cash or my cash flow today?
Taylor, and what's interesting about that property that you call one of our legacy pieces is the understanding behind why we consider it a legacy piece. The challenge we would face is even if we took a profit from that property today, we would have to go out and generate more opportunities to find the same cash flow. And it would be very problematic for us to take the profits out of that deal and find that type of cash flow.
Ed, you're absolutely right. The amount of cash we put in this was $25,000, and that produces $2,500 a month. To buy that same return would be exceedingly high.
And what's interesting about that type of return is we're getting a full return on our investment within the first year. And by our decision-making processes, that's a really great deal in our book.
Ed, using our current metric that we use, we would actually spend up to somewhere around $130,000, $135,000 to buy that same return that we bought for $25,000.
Which, in this case, there's not that type of equity in that property. And so we're certainly in a position where we're happy to have it as a cash flowing asset. We're not entirely all that concerned about generation of equity in that specific project.
It's funny you mention equity because we are cash flow people. We'll often hear people asking about what's the ARV going to be? What is the house going to be worth? ARV, for those new, is the after repair value of the house. Ed, what's the ARV going to be? What's the house going to be worth? What's the appreciation? What's the equity you're purchasing? Guys, I say this often, and I'll say it on this podcast specifically. I will pay you $1 million as long as I can make payments on my terms. Because of that, I'll buy any house within an hour of Charlotte, any multifamily within 3 hours, and for the big enough multifamily, I'll fly to it because the price isn't ultimately important when we're just worrying about the cash flow it produces. Quick advertisement, right? We'll break for advertising. If you have something that fits this criteria, please reach out to us through the social channels. We'd love to talk to you about opportunities.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking, I think there was one more point I wanted to hit.
Because someone text me this house. Good looking house. For anyone watching the video, there's the house.
Why are you looking at houses when we need to be on our podcast?
Do not talk about Fight Club. Maybe you shouldn't just bring me every piece of trash that's printed on the copier.
You're stupid. The interesting thing, Taylor, about that approach specifically is that it's not one that we just use to purchase real estate assets, but in fact, we're using it to actively purchase businesses as well. I think the acquisition that you made in December is a good example of how we can take possession of service industries that are generating cash in very similar ways, work with the previous sellers to do some type of seller held financing, still generate the same type of cash flows that we're generating inside real estate, but also outside real estate, which adds to the diversification of our business as we go forward.
I love that point. We specifically acquired a business that, one, integrated with what we do. As we continue to move forward, we use the cash flow from the business to pay the owner his payment every month. So out of pocket, again, we were $0 out of pocket for the opportunity to yet again add cash or cash flow. In this case, it was cash flow. As we continue to move forward, this is just another asset class we're going to step into. In some markets, we're hearing people talk about how overheated the market is and how we're currently at the top of some markets. As real estate in those markets is overvalued, we're looking for other opportunities that provide the same cash flow that a rental asset would provide. When real estate prices cool again, we'll step back and more aggressively pursue that side.
It's really interesting you bring up the point about markets being overheated and potentially oversaturated. One of the arguments that we hear a lot of times to try and refute your argument, Taylor, about I'll pay $1 million for any property that's habitable that I can cash flow and pay you $200 a door, right? One of the counter arguments we hear all the time is, yeah, Taylor, but what if that house that you paid $1 million for, what if it's only now worth $300,000? What would you do then? And the dynamic there that a lot of people miss is if the property's properly cash flowing, I don't have any outside influence that would force me to have to sell and to realize that quote unquote market reduction, right? We only realize gains or losses in properties when you actually exit the project. So if at some given point in time, the quote unquote market value is $300,000, and if at a later date it rises to $700,000, and if at a later date it drops back down to $600,000, those prices are only relevant if we're trying to exit the property. But if we've established our financing properly, and if we're able to stay in the property and continue to receive the cash flow that may come along with that property, we really don't have any outside forces that would cause us to really have to exit these properties, even in the event of a downturn.
Ed, we talk about that all the time. And we talk about when you get your first 5 rentals, that you make what we call your personal mutual fund. Because even if one of them goes vacant, the cash flow from the other 4 rentals will likely cover your mortgage payment for the 5th. So in the event that you have some downtime, you're still cash flowing or at least breaking even.
Right. That's absolutely the case. And that's one reason why vacancy is so important to work into our numbers. The other interesting dynamic that a lot of people miss is that in the event that there's a market downturn and there are fewer homeowners than there had been, say, the month before or the year before, that actually creates more of a demand on rental markets. Supply and demand dictate that price stability will actually be improved by more demand in the market. But I think kind of coming full circle on the conversation, I think the aspect that we're trying to share with people in this discussion through both our examples and experience is just to say that people are best served when they generate multiple sources of income and multiple streams of income. One of those could be your W-2 job, for example. Another may be dividends that you might receive through things that are in the market. And then others might be these types of cash flows that we're talking about. And I think if they're properly considered and carefully managed, these can be very appropriate for your portfolio.
Ed, I'm really excited about the conversation we've had about cash flow. I'm grateful for the possibility for generational wealth that it provides to us and our family and our future generations. I know that because of what we're doing today, that it's going to allow them a bunch of other financial freedom and opportunities. For example, our future generations aren't going to have to go get a minimum wage job to help them get them through college. Here you go. Here's a 4-plex. Rent it out to your friends and family and go from there.
I hope the conversation that Taylor and I have had tonight about cash flow has been interesting for you and might give you a little bit of insight for the way that we evaluate the opportunities in our business. If you have any questions, feel free to find us on our social media channels. We're basically listed as Kings and Queens City across all of our platforms. That's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Also find us on our website at thekingsandqueenscity.com. Hopefully this content's been valuable for you. Definitely share it with folks who may find interest, and we look forward to sharing more insight with you on our future podcasts.
If you haven't got a chance yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can get notified of our future content. Thanks for your time. We'll catch you guys later.
Thanks again for listening, guys.